getting that, right?
Yeah. I was like, I need to make sure I get that.
Okay. Wait, do you want me to introduce myself then?
You can introduce
Getting
yourself.
gold here. Getting gold.
Yes, introduce yourself. We want to know who you are.
I'm Garret Ferguson.
How do you introduce yourself? You say hi.
Say, hi, I'm Garret Ferguson. And smile.
Hey, I'm Garret Ferguson. I always grew up in a Christian household. We were going to church ever since I was an infant. I loved church. I was a social butterfly. I looked forward to it every week. Last summer, I went to a high school camp where I realized my parents had gotten into a motorcycle accident. I figured that out Friday, and when I came home, I realized that my home life was a mess. I walked into a hospital. Everything there was very depressing. And I had discovered that my dad was doing methamphetamines and that my mom was hooked on the pills that the doctors gave him. And to make the matters worse, my mom decided to leave during that whole event. And I'd spend nights crying, asking her to come back. She did come back later that month, and Christmas Eve, they started fighting again, and everything started to go downhill again. They were fighting about money, and I tried to mediate it, but it didn't help. And then that next morning, it was worse. That night, my mom found my dad with a meth pipe, and I felt betrayed and lied to, and I felt a hatred for my father. I left with my brothers to go over to their house, and my mom showed up later that night. We lived in their house for about a month before we were kicked out and had to move to my grandparents. There, I was depressed. I felt the depression. I didn't feel a will to move on, to live. Everything to me was gray. The world was gray. I didn't see color. I didn't feel emotion. I just didn't even want to get out of bed every morning. I still went to church, and I put on a mask, and I did that because I didn't want people to see me suffering. I wanted everyone to think it was okay. I got so good at putting on a mask, that's all I ever did anymore. After self-harming and doing drugs and running around being a teenage rebel to keep my mind off of things, I went to the church on a Wednesday for 660 like I usually did, but it was different because that time I fell on my knees and felt the Lord's presence, and He just overtook me. I felt this love and this passion, and I'd realized that God didn't abandon me, but I abandoned Him. After that, things started going up for me until I went to a Super Bowl party where my dad called me and said he tried to kill himself, and that hurt. Later that night, he told me he was ashamed of me being his son and that he didn't want me to be his son. That was a slap to the face, but it was different because instead of falling into a black pit, I fell into the Lord's hands and He caught me. I didn't talk to my dad for months after that until he decided to go to rehab, and that's the only reason I looked at his face. It was awkward because I still had a bitterness there that made our relationship growing not very easy. But after seeing him on a weekend basis, my relationship with him started to grow again, and I realized that he had found God again too. Now my relationship with my dad is stronger than it's ever been. One thing I can take from this whole situation is that you should not take anything for granted because it can be ripped away from you in seconds. Love what you have and love those around you, and thank the Lord for blessing you like He has. I think that this whole experience has made me a much more compassionate person, a much more accepting person, realizing that everyone has flaws and everyone has problems and that sometimes they're not in control of them. I've learned that everyone deserves love, everyone deserves grace, and that you don't have the right to tell somebody they don't. I've become a more loving person, and I don't see people for their outward appearance, but I see people for what they are inside. I used to be someone who would worry and stress about everything, but now I've learned to give it all to God. God is my best friend. He's my number one.